property.
This will be recorded and we will post this on the hub for you later, okay?
Awesome. All right, so let's see, it is 11:01, so let's get started. See, so first of all, you can mute yourselves, but type in any questions or comments that you want into the chat box. And Simon Van is going to be co-hosting with me. Hi, Simon. And he will be reading your questions and comments so that we can all hear the answers without, it cutting back and forth and, having the delays with like tech and stuff. Okay, sound good? Awesome. Okay, so Simon, you are unmuted.
Yes.
And let's see, so let me go ahead and start the slide show for you. So first of all, I wanted to introduce myself. So I am Swan Redding. I'm one of the sales and leasing managers in the Northwest office. And my colleague here, Simon Van, is one of the agents that I work with a lot about investment property. So he's worked with me with investor clients, and his dad is a contractor. He has investor clients himself, and he is starting out as an investor himself. And background about me, my parents and my husband's parents, they're all real estate investors. So they do commercial and residential. My parents got into investment property kind of by accident. My dad always fixed up our homes and then sold them. So he would do like a long flip essentially. And that was an additional stream of income. And eventually he just got into buying and holding. And then they also they did the same thing with commercial property. They started out flipping commercial properties and then buying and holding those as well. And when I was a kid, my job was to help translate the contracts for them. So it was a very big job, and that's how I learned the paperwork, but I also learned the negotiations because I had to be able to translate what my parents wanted me to tell them. And then when I was the ripe old age of 19, I got my real estate license, and I started helping them with their purchases. And when I started working with investors, it was a really hard sell to say, hey, I have all of this experience, like over a decade of experience, but I was 19 in investment properties. So it was a really hard sell. But what I have found is that when you work with investor clients, which is my favorite, it's less emotional, there's less drama. As long as the numbers work, then it's an easy sale. And my husband and I, we also are investors. So we own a portfolio of investment property. We'll talk with you all about that. And then we also flip properties because the Austin market is really where, you need to be doing that. So, but yeah, so that's a little bit of my background, and I'm excited to share with you all of the things that I've learned, all of the mistakes that I've made, any best practices that will help you save some time and headache and make some money. All right, ready? Let's see, I'm going to present my screen. Here it is. All right. Okay, Simon, can you see my screen?
I cannot.
Okay. Okay, tell me when you see it.
Okay. It is loading right now. Okay, I see it.
You see it? Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we will get started here. All right. So what I want to go over with you guys is how to find investors that want to buy property, how to get them to make offers fast, right? Because that's one of the challenges that I feel like we experience as agents is we get the client, we get them pre-qualified, and they just don't want to make offers. So I'm going to show you my process for how to do that, and then how to help them find the properties that they want. All right, so those are the three goals that we have here. So the parts of a deal, whenever you're doing any deal, but very specifically with an investor buyer is you need to figure out the money. I actually call it the resources, right? I need to know what do we have to work with in terms of timelines, money, all of that. So you need to figure out the money, you need to figure out the goal, and then you need to figure out the timeline. And if you do this up front with a client with clarity, then you're going to have a much smoother transaction. What I found is most of the time people are hesitant to proceed because they feel unsure about where they're headed. So again, these are the parts of a deal, and we're going to go into them in depth. All right. So figuring out the finances. The money part is crucial, right? It's the same as whenever you're working with a buyer client and you need to be able to qualify them. A lot of investors that I talk to or who contact me, they will say like, oh, we have a pool of money, $2 million and we want to buy stuff in cash. Or, we want to purchase property and don't worry, we're qualified. And the issue is I'm not exactly sure how much they're qualified for, so I don't always know what it is that we're looking for, right? And there are differences, in the types of property and the price ranges and stuff. And the number one factor that will tell you what properties are available as an option for the buyer is actually price, right? So it's just like any other buyer. If they are looking for something that is, between up to 500, that's going to tell you exactly what places they can buy. So they're not buying downtown, right? If they're looking for something smaller, like up to 300, again, those prices will tell you exactly what the options are. And you need to know that up front as an agent. One of the things that I talk to with my investor clients is I tell them, I'm essentially your project manager on this acquisition, right? They like words like that. And so I say, my job is to figure out what is it that you're looking for, and then figure out how to get those to you so that you can, be analyzing the correct options. And so you need to get that financing figured out. One of the things that I'll talk to you about here, you see that it's investment purchase loans. The financing is a little harder because it's a higher risk kind of loan. So typically you're going to see 20 to 25% down. It could be more. So you just have to look at the property and talk with the lender about it. And the minute that a client of mine is interested, I tell them, just like any other buyer, say you need to get with a lender and figure out what your loan options are so that when I am vetting properties for you, I know that they are properties that will work for your type of loan. Okay. And for some reason, investors, especially if they are financially just able, they're good with money. Sometimes they hesitate to take that step. And for me, I present it as, well, I need the clarity of knowing what it is that you qualify for so I can make sure the property works for you. So whenever you're talking to an investor, or if you're looking for investment purchases yourself, the minute you want to, or the minute the client wants to look at investment property, they need to get to a lender and get the terms of the loan figured out and make sure that the cash portion and all of that is going to work, right? So all of the resources need to work. The interest rates are higher on an investment loan because, again, it's a higher risk loan. So it's not the same as the stuff that they see online, right? Whenever they're talking about like, oh, interest rates are like below 3%. That's not for investment purchases. All right. And then we have renovation loans. So this is for the investor who sees a property that they want to buy and they have the money to buy the property through a loan, but they would also like to borrow money to renovate the property. So this is something that I do, and it is a loan product that's available to other investors. It's also available to owner occupants. It's the 203K, the renovation loan. And our lending partners can help you with that. But the renovation loan is really cool because what they'll do is they will go out and the appraiser will go out and appraise the property for what it would appraise for after renovation. Okay, so they will say, okay, after renovations, this property would be worth this X dollar amount. And so the buyer, can borrow up to that amount. And it's a really cool loan because of two things. One, if you purchase a property through a regular loan, you guys know that there are some condition requirements, right? So it can't be falling apart and, bad roof, no AC, foundation issues. You can't, a regular owner-occupant purchase or even a regular residential purchase can't have those kinds of conditions because the property itself is the collateral for the loan. So they need it to be something that is valuable and is going to last for the length of the loan. So the renovation loans are really cool, especially right now in Austin, where we're seeing a lot of turnovers in areas and a lot of competition and demand. So sometimes you find a property and you're like, oh man, it's available, but it needs so much work. I don't know if it'll qualify for a loan. So you need to talk with the lender and discuss, could we do a renovation loan for this client if we found something that needed massive work, right? So that is an avenue that you can check out as well. Any questions about investment loans or renovations loans so far?
Yes, I have a question.
Okay.
With a 203K, isn't there, aren't the people who are doing the renovations, don't they have to have a certain qualification to do them?
So all loans require certain qualifications. So I would say, yes, all loans have some qualification in terms of the buyer and the property, and you just need to get verification through the lender what those are. What I'm saying to you is, go ahead.
No, what I meant was the people that are doing the renovations for the homeowner getting the 203K loan. Aren't there only certain renovators and approved people who can do the repairs?
No, that's not true. Yeah. So you can use any contractors. Yeah. So for instance, we use our own contractors and what it does is you get approved for that amount and then you use it as a account that you draw from. Okay.
Very good. Thank you.
Cool. Simon, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Simon, are there any other questions?
Yeah. So Deanna asked, so for a renovation loan, about generally how much higher is the interest rate going to be?
So it depends on the market, but I mean, it's higher. Like I want to say it could be 1-2%, but it just depends on the market. Yeah. But and just like any regular loan, it also depends on the buyer's qualifications, right? So if the buyer has a lot of experience or a lot of really good credit, that adjusts the rates too. So, this is the thing that I will tell you guys when you start working with investors or any clients. Be the source of the source, but not the source, right? Like I could quote you a number and then you find out like, oh, that doesn't apply to me, right? How could I know, right? So whenever you're talking with a lender, either for a client or for yourself, get those numbers confirmed up front because they'll tell you. And the funny thing is they can't always confirm the exact number anyways, right? Like they need to tell you, they can give you like an estimate of what it'll be, but it really comes down to the property sometimes too. And when you actually find the property.
Isn't a 203K an FHA loan, or aren't those for homeowners only?
Yes. That's
Like
what I said. Yeah.
People who are going to use it as their primary residence, correct? That's not really
Correct.
an investor loan.
No, I just mentioned it as a renovation loan that's available to owner occupants because it is a renovation loan.
Okay, thank you.
People that's why I mentioned it. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
When people get renovation loans, do they typically, because there are higher interest, if they're going to get it because they're going to keep the house, don't they generally refinance as soon as they've done all the renovations?
Okay, so you can always refinance if you are keeping the house, right? Or let me say this, you can always refinance. I think your question is, if the renovation loans have a higher interest rate, can the buyer refinance after the loan is complete? The answer is yes. So they can do that. Yep.
Thank you.
Simon, are we good?
Yep, that was the last.
Sorry, guys,
question
I
got
can't
knocked.
see. Yeah, I can't see the chat screen, so I'm relying on Simon to tell me what's going on. Okay, so I want to touch real quick about seller finance. So seller financing is a really hot topic, and it's kind of tricky. All right, so this is what you need to know. Seller financing is when the seller owns the property outright without a loan, and then they become the bank and they sell to your buyer with whatever terms they, write up. So literally, they can decide the interest rate, they can decide how long of a loan, they can decide if it's even monthly payments or a balloon payment, and they can decide any fees that they want for the loan itself. So my first investment property that I bought myself, I bought it through seller financing, and I was able to negotiate an interest rate that was double the market rate at the time. Okay, so the market rate at the time was very close to this. It was like around 3%, and I paid 7% to seller finance that property. I purchased it and rented it out, and it cash flowed. It broke even, I should say. It covered itself. But 3 years later, I sold it, and I did a 1031 and purchased 2 properties. So whenever people are talking about seller financing and they're like, they're asking for this ridiculous interest rate, the interest rate matters less than what you're actually paying to get the property. So again, with investment property, as long as the numbers work, don't get hung up on, is it 5%, 6%, or 7%? It doesn't matter, right? The cool thing about seller financing is you have that flexibility. So if you talk to someone who owns a property outright and you can make a good deal for them, they'll take it, right? So for instance, we just finished a seller financing situation where the seller owned the property outright. We offered to buy it, but we said, if you want to get a little more money, then we'll purchase it directly from you instead of, with our loan, our renovation loan. We'll purchase it directly from you, renovate it. You'll earn interest during that renovation period, and then when we sell it, you'll get paid off. And he took it, and we sold it, and he loved it. And so I approached him, and I was like, hey, so since you have this big, pile of cash, are you interested in making, more, more money, more interest payments, or receiving more interest payments by funding our flips? And he said yes. So seller financing is where the seller acts as the bank. Now, the thing that you have to watch out for is, because I'm sure your minds are like, ooh, how do I find seller financing property? What you need to make sure that you do is you figure out that the property in question has no other lender, right? So it can't have another mortgage or anything like that. Because whenever you purchase a property that has another mortgage, there is a due on sale clause for that mortgage. That's why I can't run out and seller finance my house that I'm living in right now because there's a mortgage on it. And what people will try to do is they'll do what's called a Wally wrap or a wrap around loan, meaning they will wrap the new mortgage payment around the old payment. So they're kind of trying to sell the property without triggering the due on sale clause and paying off the mortgage that's already on that property. Okay, those are not cool. They're highly risky. I feel very comfortable saying they're illegal in the sense that there's not a document for that. There's not a TREC document for that. Seller financing is the same as a regular transaction, but instead of doing a third-party financing addendum, you use a seller financing addendum, right? And then you write in all the terms. You're like, this is the payment, this is the interest rate, here's how long it is there a balloon or not, whatever. So seller financing, when done correctly, without trying to be too creative with it, it is a TREC promulgated form that you can use. Make sense? Any questions about that, Simon?
No, but I did have experience with a Wally wrap last year, and Buddy actually said that JBGoodwin doesn't do those, and they are totally illegal. So stay away from those.
Yeah, and here's the thing, guys. Whenever the market is hot like this, we are vulnerable to scammers. Okay, and a Wally wrap, you guys hear about the scams with the leasing and everything. A Wally wrap is essentially, it could be the same thing, where they're saying you're purchasing this property at at a cost on top of the mortgage that it already has. But here's what happens, because they can't transfer title, right? Because if you transfer title, it triggers the due on sale clause, and the lender with the first mortgage, they'll see that, they'll know. So what happens is they're almost doing like a lease to own or a lease purchase or whatever. Again, illegal, because there's not a document for that already. So they're actually being like, again, like bad creative about, when you hear about creative financing, there's like the good and the bad, right? And so what has happened that I've heard of, like, thank God that I've never been in that situation, nor do I want any of you to put yourself in that situation, is what happens is, if you represent the buyer and they purchase a seller finance property that has another loan, you're making the payment to the seller, right? And the seller, in theory, should be taking that payment from your buyer or, yourself and paying the old note, right? So they're taking your payment, paying the old note so that the note gets paid and you still get the property. But what happens is, if the seller doesn't make that mortgage payment, who gets foreclosed on? Right? So the foreclosure happens to the buyer. And I mean, they could pay for, years or whatever. There's a down payment usually, right? So with seller financing, they typically want to see a sizable down payment because they want to see commitment. So the down payments could be anywhere between like 10, 20% or more. But if the seller who did the wraparound loan takes that down payment and is taking these payments, and then they're in a pinch and they decide to, or just forget to make the payments for the house that they no longer live in, that house gets foreclosed on and they're fine. They're in a new house already. So that's one of the risks that you have in dealing with the wraparound types of loans. And that's why I don't mess with them. So, all right, cool. Any other questions?
No.
Okay.
Question.
Cash. Cool. All right. So cash, a lot of clients, a lot of investors are calling me and saying like, hey, I have cash, I want to buy property. So the cool thing that you need to know about cash is that with a cash purchase, there are no appraisals required, right? So there are no appraisals that are required. However, if you want to have an appraisal done just for their own peace of mind or whatever, they can get an independent appraisal done. So that is kind of cool. Now, if you're buying in an area that is appreciating, then it kind of doesn't matter what it appraises for now because you're betting on the future value anyways. But if they want to use it as a negotiation tool or something, then they can definitely do that. But it kind of backfires because the whole point of a cash offer is that the seller who's accepting the offer, usually is like, oh, cool, no appraisal, right? So the other benefit is there are no lender required repairs. So we were talking earlier that every type of loan has buyer conditions and property conditions. So with a cash purchase, since there's no lender required repairs. Like the property doesn't have to be a certain condition, right? Like they don't care if the roof is bad because they can buy it cash and the lender is not going to require that because there's no lender. So that's kind of neat too, where if you have cash, you are able to target some of these more dilapidated properties and purchase them without any lender issues. Okay. And then fast closing. Sometimes people will ask me like, well, how long does a cash closing or how quickly can a cash deal close? A cash deal can close anywhere between 2 to 4 days if the money's ready to go. So it's really just a matter of getting the title paperwork put together and then the disclosures sent out for everyone to review before signing, and that's it. So again, if you have clients that have cash, you just need to confirm with them how accessible is that money. Because sometimes investors will say, oh, I'm pulling money from stock investments or, this or that account. Have them go ahead and make those moves, right? So that the money is ready to go. And then if you find yourself in a position where you're submitting an offer, then you're not waiting on making those transfers and all that, right? You're like, the money is ready to go. And then when you are submitting a cash offer, it's going to look a lot stronger. And then lastly, no debt. So that's one of the nice things about purchasing property with cash is if they are not wanting debt on the property at all, then that's one way to do it. So any questions about that?
Nope.
Yes.
No?
What about the HOA? What about the HOA documents? I mean, that typically takes a couple of weeks.
It depends on the property. So the cash itself can close in as little as 2 to 4 days. But yes, if you need to wait for other documents, then you would wait for them.
Okay. Okay, got it.
Now, the other thing I'll say about any of that other stuff, see if they can rush it. Because I've had HOA documents rushed before for like $100, $150. Another one that I do all the time, Simon knows this, I get appraisals rushed, right? If I'm competing in a multiple offer situation, one of the things I talk about with my buyers is, hey, would you feel comfortable offering to rush the appraisal? And that way, instead of closing in, like 4 to 6 weeks, we can offer to close in like 2 to 3 weeks instead, right? So just any of those things, just check and see, if there's an ability to rush it by throwing a little bit more money at it. All right. Okay. On to the next. All right. The number one thing, the key that you guys need to know that I find that all agents make a mistake with is figuring out the goals of the investor. So, and the reason is because I get a lot of investors who call me and they'll say, hey, I want to buy an investment property. And I'll ask them, cool, what are your goals? And they'll say, well, I want to make money. And I go, yeah, I'm going to make you so much money, right? But specifically, are you looking for appreciation? Are you looking for cash flow? Are you looking for low risk, right? And what they're looking for depends a lot on where they are in their lives, believe it or not. So for instance, low risk, I'll start at the bottom. Low risk is someone I have found, it's usually someone who has good money, but they want to diversify it out of the stock market and they just need it to not lose value. So a low risk investment property is going to be in an area where it's more developed, really good schools, the values are stable. They're not skyrocketing, but they're not dropping either, right? So these are the established like neighborhoods with amazing schools, great trees. It's the ones that everyone wants to live in, the ones that you know about, right? So that's low risk, but it is still an investment property. Now, appreciation, there's two kinds. There's natural appreciation, which is where you buy a property and you hold it for 10 years or 20 years, and the value around that property or the value of the area naturally rises. And because of that, the value of the property rises. That's called natural appreciation, right? Forced appreciation is like what I do, and some of you do, is when you find a property that is in an area and you see that there's room to improve the value of the property by going in and fixing it up. That's all it is. So forced appreciation is where you upgrade the condition of the property so that the value is higher within that same market. And the difference between the two is, what is it, Simon? Time.
Yes.
Right? Yeah, it's time. So that's one of those things where, like, if you bought a property in Austin, pretty much anywhere, and you held it for, 10, 20, 30 years, it's going to, the value is going to rise. Forced appreciation is much shorter. So it's very important that when you're talking to your clients about what their goal is, that they give you a timeline, right? We talked about that, the timeline, the resources, that's the money, the goal, and the timeline. And again, this ties back to where they are in their lives, because I get a lot of California tech investors who have great jobs, good money, but they're young. And so they will say, oh, we've saved up $300,000 and we want to buy a property in cash. And I go, cool. What do you need the cash flow for? Or they want to buy it in cash so that it cash flows. And those of you who have seen my video about that, we're going to talk about that in a second regarding cash flow versus leverage. But they'll say like, yeah, I want to buy it in cash and so that it cash flows. And I go, yeah, if you buy anything in cash, it will cash flow because there's no mortgage on it. But what you're doing is you're paying yourself back your own money over the length of time that you own it. So if they are in a position where they don't need the money, right? Like they have good jobs, they're making money, they're healthy, their jobs aren't at risk. Then one of the things that I ask them is, if you have all of these things, right? Like I just said, good jobs, they're healthy, their jobs aren't at risk. Would you rather have more houses or one house that cash flows, right? And that's where leverage comes in. And so they'll say, well, I'd rather have more houses. And I say, okay, well, that makes sense because you are technically in the building phase of your portfolio, right? So whenever this money, this cash flow comes in, let's say that you cash flow, $500 or $600 a month or whatever. What would you do with that money? That's a really important question. I ask them all the time and they laugh and they say, well, I'd save it up and buy another one. I go, yeah, but it's your money, right? You bought the property with cash and you're paying yourself back this cash flow, and you're saving that up so that you can buy your next one, right? Versus, and the client that I'm talking about, he had $300,000. I said, what if you just put $60,000 down, bought 3 properties, right? With $60,000 down each. He still had another, like, I don't know what the math is, Simon. Like, and he still had he still had $120,000 left as his emergency fund. And so I said, this is what you need to do. Buy the 3, leave $120,000 on the side. And then if you want to flip any one of those, right? Like if you decide in a year or 2 or 3, you want to put the money in to update and renovate one and sell it for top dollar, you use that 120. And what that 120 emergency fund, that slush fund does for him too, is I said, you're not going to worry about repairs and vacancy time, because that's what people who purchase with cash, they're concerned, like, oh, if I buy with cash, then I'm less at risk for vacancy time and, you know, cost of repairs and things. And I go, yeah, but again, it's your own money, right? So instead of saying, let me keep my money liquid here and then take care of them, they're saying, I'm going to tie it up in the property and then wait for it to come back to me slowly. Does that make sense to you guys? So that's the difference between cash flow and leverage. For me, it's huge. It's one of those things where once I walk through that process with the investor, then they understand, like, hey, if I'm in a building phase and purchasing property in Austin, yes, it does make sense for me to try to buy more while interest rates are lower versus, and prices are lower, right? Versus trying to purchase one where all of my cash is tied up and I'm slowly getting this money back that I don't really need in order to live, right? So that's where cash flow versus leverage comes in. And once you figure that out, not only are you going to help them build that portfolio faster, right? You're also helping them diversify. So, did you say something, Simon?
No questions.
Okay, cool. Any questions about this? Like, this is the key. This is the number one mistake that I see agents making, is not getting clarity from their clients about the goal. How much money are you trying to make? Are you trying to make it in terms of cash in your hand, right? That's the cash flow. Or are you trying to make it in terms of appreciation? Mark Merle did this awesome class a couple of years ago, and he said, I would buy properties like that, you know, broke even or less. And he has no problem with that. And the reason, he said, was because that's not the big money. And I've used those words with my clients before. And I tell them, look, if you are negative cash flow, $100 or $200 a month, but the value of the dirt goes up $30,000 a year, that's the big money, right? So what it does for you as the agent is, not only are you helping the client get clarity on what they're looking for, when you find a property, you're going to have less hesitation because you're on the same page with that client, right? If you show them a property and they're like, yeah, but it's really ugly. And I go, yeah, we're not looking for pretty, right? You pay for pretty. What we're looking for is it in a location where the appreciation is going to rise dramatically for you in the next couple of years when you own it, based on your timeline, right? So again, when you break these things down for your clients, it's going to help them know when you bring something to them, it'll help them identify it as, oh, that makes sense. I want that, right? And the issue that I think any buyer has is that they don't have clarity on, does this property suit my needs? And the reason I think that they don't have that clarity is because they have not gone through that process of understanding exactly what it is that they need. Usually these are very smart people who have heard lots of things and looked around online and maybe even read some books and, you know, listened to some podcasts. But as the professional working with them right then, I feel like if we walk them through that discovery process and making sure that you're on the same page, I always say that to the client. I say, I just want to be on the same page as you, so that when I am out in the field and I see something, I can immediately identify whether or not it suits, you know, our needs. And so this process is the key. If you can just learn this and go through, practice going through this with your investor clients, what are you looking for? Appreciation, cash flow, or low risk? the joke is they always say all three, right? And then I talk about, okay, well, let's prioritize it. Let's talk about the difference. And then that's going to help you narrow down on what is it that you're looking for. And they're also going to be on the same page as you, so that when you submit a property to them, they're right on board. So, and the thing that I will tell you is most agents are not doing this. So when you do this with an investor, you're going to stand out already, and you're going to look professional simply because you understand the different types of ways that they can make money. You just want to make sure that the type of way that they want to make money is understood by you, right? And by them, because sometimes they don't understand. All right, cool. So finding investors. All right. So the number one way to find investors, I'm just going to, I put this in here in case everyone else doesn't know, but in the tax records, any property has, like, if you drove down the road and you saw a property that you think like, oh, that might be an interesting property, you can just look up that address on the tax records and it'll tell you the owner's tax billing address. So there's an owner tax billing address and a property address. So if the owner's tax billing address, which is where the tax bill is sent to, if it's not the same as the subject property, right, the property address, then that means that's an investment-owned property. So the owner lives somewhere else where they get the tax bill, and then the subject property, the property that you looked at, it's that, that address. So whenever those two don't match, that is the address for the investor. Okay. One of my favorite ways to contact the owner is to offer them an unsolicited CMA. Aaron Sesteros in the San Antonio office loves doing this, and it is something that we can actually do really quickly through our Moxie program. And basically, it's a really nice presentation regarding the value of their property in comparison to the activity for the area. And if you send one and just make it like an annual thing, you are going to become their favorite agent, whether they have one or not, because that's not something that they're going to open up and toss, right? Or not open up even. They're going to open it up and read it and get excited every year to see like, oh, hey, here's the information about my property, right? So an unsolicited CMA is a really great tool to connect with investors. So if you get their tax billing address, just send them an unsolicited CMA and a little note introducing yourself. I like to send, I keep them on my desk, but I like to send my card with the magnet backing, because I feel like those are less likely to be thrown away. And all they have to do is stick it on the fridge once and you're there forever. So anytime that they have that moment where they're like, oh, I really need to talk to an agent, you're already there. So, and then you're getting those touches, they're getting those regular touches from you regarding the value of their property as well. So market notifications. So in your unsolicited CMAs, or even if you just write a note and send it to them, you can offer to have them sign up for neighborhood news. And that's, again, through our awesome JBGoodwin software, through Moxie. And it's a once-a-month newsletter. And I always say it's once a month, and it gives you updates on what's available, what is pending, and what's sold, right? And so that's another thing that you can offer. And the cool thing about the neighborhood news is I tell my clients, you can look through the photos. Like, I can send you a CMA, but you can't look through the photos of the other properties. But because it's digital and online, this will allow you to browse through the photos of your neighbors and find out, how the houses compare. And then new lease listings. So one of the things that you know for sure is that any property that is a rental property is owned by an investor. So whenever you find a new lease listing in a neighborhood, if you have a buyer who's interested, consider looking at those and, asking the seller's agent if the landlord would be interested in selling. And I have a lot of lease listings because I work with a lot of investors. And so whenever the agent started calling me about that, I thought, wow, that's a genius idea. And the funny thing is that when I bring it to my investors and I say, hey, I got this offer to buy it, are you interested in selling? And they'll say, well, yeah, at the right price. So it's really interesting, right, that you could potentially find more properties that are not advertised as for sale by looking at the investment properties anyway, so the lease listings. Make sense? Yeah. Okay. Is my audio working?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. My mic has been being funky on my laptop, so I'm using my phone, so I just want to make sure it works. Okay. And then lastly, I'm going to tell you about my favorite kind of farm. It's an investor farm. Simon knows all about this, and I love it so much.
Mom,
Okay, so yeah.
just real quick, you snail mail the unsolicited CMA to the people in the tax records, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And JBGoodwin, you know, we have the mail system. You can just snail mail it that way, and they'll charge it to your accounts receivable account. Or if you want to be fancy, like FedEx it, because then it looks really awesome. So there's that. Okay. It's all about presentation. So let me tell you real quick about my investor farm. So it's a system that feeds itself, okay? And what you do is you go into a target neighborhood, and I recommend either your own neighborhood, a neighborhood where you have an investor who's looking, or a neighborhood where you want to purchase investment property yourself, okay? So find a neighborhood that you want to farm for investment property. Pull up all of the investor-owned addresses for that neighborhood. So those would be the rental properties in that neighborhood, right? So when you pull up that list of rental properties in that neighborhood, you're going to come up with two lists. One list is the addresses of the owners, the investors, right? The other list is the addresses of the properties which are occupied by renters, i.e. future buyers, right? So if you pull up this list, and it's usually not a huge list, so it's really manageable, and it's so fun to do. So you have a little list, and it's all the investment properties or all the rental properties in a little neighborhood. And you start off small, and you can repeat this in different neighborhoods or just grow it, whatever you want. But you have this list of investors that own property in that neighborhood, and then future buyers / renters that live in that neighborhood, okay? So then what you do is you start going through that list of investors and sending them CMAs, those unsolicited CMAs, right? Hey, just wanted to introduce myself. I am a real estate agent that is specializing in this neighborhood. I noticed that you own an investment property here. Don't know when the last time it was that you had a updated market analysis of the value of your property, but here is one. And by the way, let me know if you're interested in buying or selling. I have other investors and in the neighborhood, right? I have a list of other investors and buyers in the neighborhood, which you do now because you just pulled it up and made the list. That's all you did, right? So what happens is if that unsolicited CMA triggers a call, you potentially could either sell that property or sell them another one, right? And what you now can do is you can say to the investor, hey, were you interested in selling this property? If you are, I will notify my list of investors for that neighborhood and let them know about your property, and we could even sell it, you know, off the market. We don't even have to go through, you know, MLS and all that crazy stuff, right? Also, I do have a list of buyers who are currently renting in that neighborhood. Would it be all right for me to send it to them as well? Okay. And when we did open houses before, which we totally can do now, I actually suggested doing private open houses. So in addition to just, you know, sending out to these, the other investors and the renters in the neighborhood, which again, you can do through Quantum, JBGoodwin's the best, right? So you can just send them a quick note, a quick postcard saying, off-market property available for sale. And you can send one to the investors, the other investors that own that property in the neighborhood, and you can send a separate one to the renters / buyers that live in that neighborhood, right? And that's going to get you some interest. So if they're interested in selling, that's one way for you to market to the rest of your list, right? If they're interested in buying, then you do the same thing in reverse. You just send the other investors, hey, I have a investor who is looking to purchase more property in this neighborhood. Would you be interested in, you know, in selling? And what could happen is you might get more interest saying, well, I'm interested in buying into this neighborhood too. So essentially what you've done is you're going to create a list of people who all own property in that neighborhood and a list of buyers, future buyers, the renters who want to buy property in that neighborhood as well. And so they're already invested in that neighborhood, is my point, right? And by you being the connection, you can help the investors that own in that property already buy more property in that neighborhood, and you can help the renter who's already living in that neighborhood, either for proximity to work, schools, whatever, right? Friends. So you can help that renter that already lives in that neighborhood purchase property in that neighborhood because you have access to the most potential sellers in that neighborhood. So that is the system that feeds itself. And it's a really cool way for you to find investment property. And if you become one of those investors and you want to start looking for property for yourself, you're basically creating a system that allows you to know about property before it hits the market. So if you're in the market to build your portfolio, you're going to have access to that first. But if you're not, then you now have privileged information that you can then share as a value to other investors and buyers. So, system that feeds itself. Any questions about that?
I do. So,
yes.
In finding these investors, one thing that I'm thinking about is when I first started, most of my business was just lease clients, tenants. Is there a way to leverage those tenants to find investors instead of just the lease listings?
Yes. Okay. All right. And great question, Simon. So remember when I told you guys that when I started real estate, I was like 19. Okay. So the funny thing is I had all this experience in investment property, but I was 19 and I moved here from Houston, and Austin's a college town. And so I just looked like some kid, not even in college yet, just trying to do real estate. And so what happened was all of my colleagues, and this was like almost 20 years ago, but all of my colleagues, they focused only on residential sales. They did not want to do leasing at all. And I was happy to do it because it was quick money and it was easy to me. And the cool thing that I learned very fast is that a lease transaction will give you the most number of contacts for your book of business, right? Because think about it. In a regular sale, you have a buyer and a seller, and that's it. But in a lease transaction, you have an investor who owns a property with a renter in it moving to another property owned by another investor. So for me, I had 2 investor contacts plus a future buyer contact. So I love investment property. I love leasing. I used to knock out a lot of leasing. It's so much so, it was such a stigma back then, and not a stigma, but people just didn't want to do it. They considered it like a small transaction because the money from a lease transaction is, I think, approximately 1/10 of a sales transaction. But that to me was really short-sighted thinking because I was after the contact, not the dollars for that particular sale. And so very quickly, I built my book of business up with investors and buyers. And the cool thing about investors is that they usually want to buy more than one property, right? And they're already an easy sale, right? If the numbers work, they're happy, they'll buy it. The other thing too is that they're usually a lot more flexible because they're not living in it, right? They don't need it to be just so, and the color is this or that. They don't care. They're going to fix it up anyways, right? So it was a really, those are easier sales to me. And because I was working with the renters, I had a future buyer, right? So it was really cool. So to answer your question, Simon, what I did was whenever I started working with a tenant, I had them fill out the application, right? And that's what helps me pre-qualify them because I can read through the app and see if there's any missing or anything like that I need to do, right? To help them prepare for getting approved. And what I would do is I would call the landlord on the application and I would say, hey, my name is Swan and I am helping your tenant move. And I just wanted to let you know that I'm going to keep you updated on our progress. I'll let you know when we found something and the lease is actually signed. Also, I can help you get your property re-rented when the tenant moves out. And then whenever they go to the new place, I would always include a note to the landlord saying, hey, with a card, right? hey, my name is Swan. I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm the agent that found the tenant for your property. I just wanted to give you my contact in the event that you needed any help. If you needed help, reaching the client, or if you would like to buy or sell property, I want to be able to help you, right? So that was how I utilized a lease transaction to build my book of business up with investors super fast. Now, the question that I get a lot is they'll say, well, what if I place my tenant in that lease listing and it's listed with someone else, right? And the answer to that is you are not soliciting someone else's client when there is no listing, right? So once the property is leased and the property goes down, that's a client, right? Or a potential client, a lead. And so writing a note and saying, hey, I'm the one that I'm the one that found the tenant for your property. I want to give you my contact information in the event that you need help getting a hold of them or something like that. I think that's perfectly fine and, done with a lot of integrity. So, but that's what I did. And so, if they have, I'll tell you this, if they have someone that they're already working with, like even the current landlord place that they're living in, what you can do is you could eventually win them over because they see that you're responsive, you're proactive, and sometimes all you need is just a chance to prove yourself. But that's the way that I did it, and it built my book of business with investors up very, very quickly. And then oftentimes I would find they would call me and say, hey, my tenant just gave me notice. I got your card, it was on my fridge or whatever, or, I know that you're the one that worked with them. I just wanted to see if you can help me relist and things like that. So it's really cool, but that's essentially how you can build your book of business up. Make sense?
Yep.
Okay. Frequently asked questions. All right, I'm going to go through this super quick. What areas? Honestly, any area that you see in Austin that's developing, right? So you can't really go wrong. What's more important, I think, is what areas to avoid. So the thing that you guys need to know is if the property is in an area that's like just developing, meaning there's a lot of empty land and things like that, then just know that those types of properties have a lot more risk. And the reason is because you don't know what that property is going to look like in 5, 10, or 20 years, right? So when we go back to the goals of the investors, if you're talking about low risk, remember a low risk property profile is in an established area. There's not a lot of change happening dramatically, right? So that's low risk. So the opposite is high risk, where there's a lot of dramatic change happening rapidly, right? So the cool thing about buying in an area that's further out, where there's a lot of development happening, is you're probably going to get lower prices and less competition, right? But those are really reserved for people who are going to be holding something for a long time, right? So a long time. And just, again, be wary of the risk associated with unknown factors. And what I mean by unknown factors specifically is if it backs up to a space that is not being used for something, but let's say that space is connected to a major thoroughfare, you don't know if that space is going to be a gas station, a tire shop, a McDonald's, we don't know. And so to me, it's more important to figure out the things to avoid and watch out for those kinds of, risk mines, right? But in Austin, you can't really go wrong by targeting any area where you see some major development, especially with all the major employers and stuff like that. Okay. What property?
What do you consider a long time?
Go ahead.
What do you consider a long time?
I mean, it depends on what we're talking about. And actually, this is what I would say. It goes back to the buyer. Oops. So the buyer is the one that has to tell you, hey, I plan on holding this probably for 10 or 20 years or forever, right? And it also depends on the area, right? So if you see it's an area where, let's say, okay, Hutto is an area where it's been developing and it's still developing, right? Mm-hmm. Versus a place like Taylor, so it's further out, developing much slower. So it really depends on what are the needs of the buyer, and you need to ask them what they consider a long time. Right. Okay. And that's a great question, because sometimes I'll talk to someone and they'll say, oh, I want to hold it for a while. And I go, what's a while? And they're like, well, like a really long time, like 3 to 5 years. That's not a long time. right? So to me, that immediately goes back to, okay, so this is a short-term appreciation buyer, right? So it helps you just qualify. What properties? I got this from Mark Merle, and I have found it to be true year after year. What you want is something easy to rent and easy to sell. If it's too big, too expensive, too weird, you're going to have objections, right? And the thing is, whenever you buy a property that is easy to rent, easy to fix up, easy to sell, those are the kind of properties that people want to rent quickly because it's normal, right? Like just my favorite is a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garage, not backing up to anything weird like a major road or a railroad or whatever, the electrical conduit things. And that's it, and it doesn't really matter much other than that. Are 2 stories okay? Yep. 2 stories are okay, but my recommendation is making sure that you at least have 1 bedroom downstairs, particularly the master bedroom, because I have found in working with renters and buyers is that they want either the separation from the kids or the roommates or whatever, or they have some specific medical need for having someone downstairs. So either an aging parent or, a special needs person or someone who can't handle stairs. So, so 1 stories sell faster typically, which, they also rent faster. But if you're going to do a 2-story, try to have like at least 1 bedroom, ideally the master downstairs as well, right? Price range. So I did the Jim Gaines economic talk that he had earlier this year or last year, or late last year, or earlier this year. And it's really interesting. And you guys can look this up on the ABOR statistics, but the price range that sells the most and the fastest is actually between 200 and 400,000. Why is this important? This is important to you to know in terms of if you are buying a property to flip, right? Or that the client has they want to buy it with the intention to sell later. So for instance, with the Apple campus opening and potentially the Amazon and the Tesla campuses, there are clients of mine who say, I just want to buy a property there, hold it for 3 years, and then sell it later. I don't want to do anything else to it. But they know that they're probably going to make money off of that, right? So the price range is important in that they need to be able to buy in a market or a price range that when they resell it, it's not going to be an issue. I've learned this the hard way because I've done really big flips where it was outside of my, that price range, and it just took longer to sell. And that means increased holding time, higher expenses in terms of renovating the house itself, because it's usually a nicer, bigger house in a nicer, bigger area. So you want to just be conscientious of that when you are helping your client decide where to invest their money. Again, it has to do with what their goals are. When I look at a property as a potential flip, I'm looking at it as, when I am done with this, can I sell it quickly and get my money out so I can move on to the next project? And because of that, I just within the last 2 or 3 years, my husband and I have decided we're sticking in that price range. So it's going to be right there in between 200 and 400, because it's better for us to be able to sell quickly versus waiting longer for a higher priced property to sell, because it ties up our money. So, but those are the price ranges.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
With regard to price, when you're looking at a house that needs to be renovated to flip, what and you're deciding what you're going to offer on that house, what is generally your percentage that you're looking for to make? Is it like around 30% or?
No. So you're talking about me specifically as an investor, or you're talking about clients in general?
You specifically and in general.
Okay. So specifically, I work for my husband, who is the buyer. Right. And so specifically what I do is I just ask him, I say, hey, what do you need to make from a certain deal in order for it to be worth doing? Right. And so he has, a bottom net goal that he needs to make in order for him to move forward with a flip. I guess it's fine to share with you. His bottom net goal is $50,000. So that's what he wants to do it for. And I said, wow, $50,000, that's a lot. And his thought is this: to buy the property can take 1 to 2 months. To renovate the property can take 2 to 4 months, and then to sell it again can take another month or two, right? And so for him, he's like, to go through all of that work, I need to make at least $50,000, right? But to answer your question, the second part of your question is, what about for the buyer? It goes back to the buyer, right? So the buyer has to be able to tell you what they are looking for in terms of profit. Are they looking for, you know, if they're doing a flip, what are the numbers that they need? And are those realistic, right? And it's easy. What you do is if they say, well, I need to make this percentage profit or whatever, and percentages to me can be deceiving. I'd rather target a dollar amount because there's a lot of ways you can get to that dollar amount, right? And the other thing I would say is, what if they say they need a certain dollar amount or percentage, just take a sample property and then work out the numbers and show them, hey, that's not going to work, right? Or you can do that sample, work out that example. And then for you, you found out like, oh, it works, but I have to stay within this price range. Does that make sense? So that's how I would go about it. Now, the other thing that you mentioned was making offers. Simon knows this. We make offers on properties sight unseen all the time. And let me tell you why. The reason is because in this very competitive market where there are tons of home renovators and flippers and agents coming out of the woodwork, the types of properties where you can go in, fix them up, and make money, that's what everybody wants. Also, we're small potatoes. Like, we're not builders, right? Like, we don't know how to, I mean, we can replace roofs, fix foundations through like foundation companies. We've done pipe, like plumbing replacement, right? None of that scares us, but we're not builders. And so we're kind of like small, we're a small operation. So it can't be so bad. Like, it can't be a tear down in a full build. Like, we don't have the hold time or the ability to do that. So the kind of properties that we do, it's the kind that everybody wants. So there's a lot of competition. So what I would say to you and your clients is, if you submit an offer and it's not accepted, you lose nothing. If you submit an offer and it's accepted, you only have your option fee on the line. And so what making offers, strong offers that quickly allows us to do is we put the offers out there, and if we get accepted, then we take that due diligence time to get it inspected, get our repair costs confirmed, and then decide whether or not we're moving forward. But we don't, sometimes, like, if I find something that I think is a good deal, the time that it takes for my husband to go check it out and let me know that it's a good deal, it's already got multiple offers, right? And some of those offers are from people who are going to own or occupy it because they're like, yeah, we'll just move in and fix up ourselves. So they're paying higher because they're not trying to make a return, like a quick cash return like we are. So to save all of that time, we just do that. And as an agent, I'll tell you that when I work with a investor, especially if they're new to me, after we lose our first one, then I introduce the idea of, would you be open to the idea of submitting offers, without the property being seen? And what that does for us is it gets our offer on the table fast. And if it's accepted, because it might not be, if it's accepted, your option fee is on the line, but then you have the time to go get it and checked out, inspected, and all of that to confirm whether or not you want it. So that's my process. And I found that it just cuts down a lot of running around for properties that we get outbid on. So, all right. And that looks like we're about up for time. So was this helpful?
Very, thank you.
Super helpful.
Cool.
Very much. Thank you.
Yeah, and so Simon and I were just talking about it. We're thinking about starting up a JBGoodwin Real Estate Investment Club. What do you guys think about that?
Oh my God, that's absolutely great.
Okay, that's one vote there. Yeah, so I think it would be really cool so we can. Yeah. Okay, well then stay tuned. We'll get that set up and we'll send an invite out to you guys, and we'll start sharing our investment ideas, tips, and things like that, and help each other get more investment properties sold and purchased. All right. Y'all have a great week. Bye.
Thanks,
Thanks, Simon.